Cloud? Okay. Katie's asking if I can record it. I think that's
See,
happening now.
yeah,
Yes.
either is fine. Thank you.
Okay. Sounds good.
Okay.
So just I always like to know out of curiosity where you all are sitting right now. What city and state? Where are you? Where are you calling in from? Because it's fun to hear, for me to hear where you are. So Claire in Litchfield,
I'm in Flowery Branch, Georgia.
Georgia, awesome. New York, Evelyn. So we have
Gastonia, North Carolina.
North Carolina. Yeah. Great. Okay. Well, I appreciate hearing from everybody. It is sort of overcast and feeling a lot like Minnesota fall here today. I think it's about 60 degrees and windy, so we're getting out our sweaters. So we're having a change of season. So I will go ahead and get started. Again, if you're on, if you want to mute so that we can't all hear you, and then if you ever want to jump in, either do that or go ahead and go right on the chat function and you can share your questions that way. That's probably going to be easiest with the size group. I'm guessing this will be about an hour's worth of conversation, and some of you will know lots of this because you have been writing resumes, critiquing resumes. Some of you have done it, but it's been a number of years. So again, just in the chat box, if you'd be willing to, in one line, say where you think you are in your resume development process, and I'll give you a couple words. You can say, you know, haven't done this in 10 years, need to update, or I just updated it a month ago, or I've done some updating, but I need help on newer trends and some tips and suggestions. So sort of just let me know where you are at personally in the resume writing process. Okay. Great. Okay. That's fantastic. So it looks like a whole range of, yep, I just did it in the last, week, to it's been about 5 years. Good. So I'm going to share some tips and strategies from what we're hearing from employers, what they're looking for, how to incorporate new education, new experiences. The other thing that I'm very aware of for you all, many of you are actually part of search processes where you are looking at resumes all the time and you have knowledge and tips to share with your classmates as well. So as we go through, I might ask some questions. What is your feedback? What have you noticed if you've been on the receiving end of applications? I always find every time I'm on a search committee at the college, I become better at my job as a coach for students who are looking for jobs because you see things through a different set of eyes. So I would always appreciate your feedback as we go through. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen and get started. And again, I think it'll be about an hour's worth, going back chatting a few times, showing you some tips, some resources to use as you continue updating or start updating for some of those of you where it's been a while. So I'm going to share my screen and let's get this presentation ready to go. Okay, so again, we are primarily going to be talking about resumes with a little bit of cover letters because they really do go hand in hand. It's so interesting to me as I've recently been on a search committee. I have found that the resume is the place where most people are still going to know the basics. Do you have the right skills, the right background, the right credentials? The cover letter is still the place that people go to find out if you have passion for the field, the place, the organization. So they really, especially as you're looking for professional positions, it seems like they're both still valuable instruments for the job search process. Some people ask me if anybody ever really reads the cover letter, and I do think there's some organizations where they don't spend as much time on it, but enough do that I still want you to be working on the cover letter. Especially again as you move into higher level positions, transitioning to new positions, it is your place where you get your personal narration, your personal story gets to come out more than what's accounted for usually in the resume. So we'll talk a little bit about this. We have all kinds of resources for you. So today we're doing resumes and cover letters. If in the future you'll probably hear from us again, and we'll talk about using LinkedIn as a networking tool. We'll talk about interviewing skills. We'll give you some follow-up tips on writing resumes and cover letters. We're doing this today through a classroom format, but again, if there's questions you feel like you want to talk one-on-one, or you need more assistance, or you have a specific situation, don't hesitate to reach out to us. In our office, I'm on the left. Carrie Taylor Kemp does employer relations. Andrea Chartier is another person you may be hearing from in a presentation, or certainly if you made an appointment or sent in documents, probably either Andrea or I would be doing your critiques. Diane's on the far right. She actually retired. Her last day was yesterday, so I don't have a new picture up. And we have a new person who I've listed here. Her name is Randy Amdahl, and her email is there. Our general website, tons of resources on our website, because we want to make sure you have those resources all the time. I mean, you know, one of the things we find is that students are accessing our resources often between 8 p.m. and 1 a.m., because that's when you might have time to actually be working on this, but it's when we're not in the office. So we've done the best that we can of making sure the resources are out there for you that way. Okay. When we talk about all the application materials that you need to put together, I like to think about that each one of them is a way for you to tell your story. And so if I think about it that way, the resume and the cover letter really are your written version of that story. Your ability in writing to share information about yourself in a succinct way that showcases your writing ability. So there's a couple things to be aware of there. It is one example of your communication skills. So right away, people are judging a little bit about you based on your communication skills in the written format. The next way that people would do that is through the interview. And so this is your ability to verbally tell your story. So you have everything in writing, and then can you expand it? Can you give the details? Can you give the background? And again, we'll talk more about that in a later time in your class. Interesting for me, so I've been in this particular role for 16 years. When I started, this was not part of our presentation. We didn't talk about social media and your digital identity, but certainly that has changed over the years. The reality is that, you know, it varies based on employer, but I would say somewhere between 70 and 90% of employers will say they do something on social media to either recruit candidates, to advertise openings, or to find more information about you. So one of the things we'll say now, we'll say it again in the future, is to Google yourself and see what comes up. Make sure you're happy with what comes up. If you're not, you can go back and do some cleaning up of whatever is out on social media. So there is a little bit of management, but really, how can you use it in a very positive way? How can you make sure that if you have a LinkedIn profile, it's telling all the great things you're doing and that you're connected to your professional organization and to your peers? So you really can make it a selling point versus just being afraid of it. So do sometime go out and Google yourself, see what comes up, make sure something comes up, which usually is because you're active on some kind of social media and that is a positive image of yourself. One of the things that when we talk about social media, there was, I think at the beginning of things like Facebook and LinkedIn, a lot of fear related to it. For me now, it's all about consistency. That if an employer read your resume and then they interviewed you, they called your references, and then they went to your social media accounts, that they're seeing the same thing. They're hearing the same thing about you, that your skills, your traits, your education, that's all honest and informative all the way through. So less fear-based and more, how do we make sure it's a consistent message? Okay, so what should your resume do? You know, like with any good writing, it's good to just pause and say, what is the purpose of this? So a resume is a summary of your education, experiences, accomplishments, and skills. Two key parts to that: it's a summary. It does not need to include everything you've ever done. Some of us want to share everything because we're proud of it. That's great. But on a resume, it doesn't need to be everything. It just is a summary. So there might be things that aren't as relevant. They're getting old, things that you're going to shrink down because it is a summary. The other thing is that it's important to know that it's paid and unpaid experiences. So it's your education, it's internships, it's your full-time employment, it's other community leadership activities that might be relevant for the job. And ultimately, of course, you're trying to persuade the employer to bring you in for an interview or hire you for the position. So it's giving enough that someone wants to hear more. Okay, so let's get to the quick tips right away. When we ask employers, if you could summarize the most important things that you're looking for in a resume or your quick tips, what would you share with us? And these are some of the things we consistently hear. Typically 1 page for new grads. Some of you have lots of work experience, so you might be justified going to 2 pages. If you go to 2 pages, you would want at least a third of a page on the second page to justify going to 2 pages. So if you only have 2 or 3 sentences on the second page, we should work on formatting on page 1 to get it all in. Also, don't feel if you're someone who doesn't have as much experience, it's okay to be a 1-page resume. So don't add a bunch of fluff just to get it to 2 pages. And it also depends a little bit on what setting you're applying. So healthcare, nonprofits, education, much more willing to look at a 2-page resume. More traditional business settings probably are still wanting a 1-page resume. Again, depends a little bit level of position, a little bit about your background. So 1, maximum 2 pages. Because employers are scanning through in about 30 seconds, at least at their first review of your resume, because of that, I really encourage you to think about using bullets versus just a paragraph. And that's because I just don't think the employers will take the time to read through it. They want to scan through pretty quickly, get a sense of who you are. So I'd really encourage you to think about using bullets. Again, sample of your writing. So the key is giving yourself time for enough drafts so that you can have several sets of eyes look at it. Like for so many of us, we know what we're trying to say. So that we stop seeing the typo. So we need several people to look through it to catch those things that we might not see ourselves. This is one of the things that I work with students a lot, especially as they're getting down to their final drafts of their resume. So you're going to have a resume, and some of you already do, that's pretty good. You're almost ready to send it. And now you have a position that you're interested in. What I would suggest that you do is you print your resume and print the job description, or if you have 2 screens, put them side by side. Look at the description in the job and make sure the language they're using is matched in some way with the language you're using on your resume. So if they are 3 different ways in the job description, they talk about being part of a team and collaborating. Make sure you're using those kind of terms as well in your resume. You probably do it, but you may not have chosen in the past to focus on that in your bullets. So see what they're focusing on and make sure that you are having that same focus in yours. You can use their language, that's fine, but definitely show those skills and demonstrate those abilities. Email and contact information. So everything, again, it's telling a story about you. Your CSS email is good for a lifetime, so now and as you graduate, so you can certainly use that, but you can use your own email as well. Just make sure it's appropriate. Sometimes we set emails up, years ago, and we have sort of goofy names, Soccer Girl 23, Hot Mama 15, whatever. We don't want to use that on the resume, so make sure it's a professional email address. And phone number, of course, that you have are expecting people to call you with offers for interviews so that you have an outgoing message and that they know that it's you. So make sure you have that set up. We are going to spend a chunk of time talking about this because this is the biggest piece of feedback that we hear from employers and that we end up giving feedback on. Many people, when they write their resume, will have it focused on just the tasks that you do in your job. What employers would like to see more of is what were the skills used to accomplish those tasks, and or what did you do really well? What did you improve? Can you quantify it? Can you give some descriptors? So rather than just, managed manage staff in XYZ department. How many staff? How did you do that well? What kind of skills did you use to ensure that you were an excellent manager in that setting? So a little bit less about the task and more about the skill. We'll get back to that. Shannon is one of our alums who worked in health services, in HR, and I just asked her what her biggest tip was. And she just said, make sure it's professional and accurate and tell something about you, all your application materials. Okay. This is one of sometimes the hardest part for people is that you can ask literally 5 different people their opinion on resume writing, and you can get 5 different opinions back, right? So it's hard. You have to ask the question, hear the feedback, and then you make it your own. You have to be proud and comfortable with whatever you put together in the end. So regardless of all the opinions that you might get, these are things you must answer yes to no matter what. So it has to be easy to read. Keep in mind that 30-second glance that people do at first. Make sure there's no errors, no typos. Make sure it's honest and truthful, and that it has a little bit of depth. So even though someone can scan through it in 30 seconds, you've moved beyond just tasks and moved into skills. Okay. I'm just checking to see if there's any questions. Well, I think we're all still good. So keep those things in mind. There's so many great typos that people share about things that come in, and this one always makes me laugh. So, missing one letter, one word can drastically change the content of what you mean to say on your resume. Okay, so let's talk first about format. Margins, generally 1 inch. Your top margin can actually be as small as 0.5 because it ends up being like your name letterhead, which can rise closer to the top of the page. Left-right margin should generally be at least 1 inch. Sometimes you can get away with 0.8, 0.9. If you get smaller than that, it just rides too close to the left and right margin. Again, we talked about 1 to 2 pages. If you go to 2 pages, make sure you have your name again somewhere on the second page. Could be a running header, running footer, so that if they print it out and the 2 pages get separated, they can get them back together again. I would personally avoid wizards and templates. Sometimes they can seem like a great way to start your resume, but they end up being frustrating in the end because it doesn't give you full control of all the formatting changes you might want to do. In addition, they start to all look the same. I usually can tell, of course, I look at lots of resumes, but I can usually tell when one is a wizard or a format because I see that format come in a lot. So just a standard Word document, use examples, but format it yourself. Within there, the most common is still called reverse chronological, meaning you'll have headers, and underneath the headers is always most recent to least recent. So under education, you would have St. Scholastica at the top because it's your current education, but you've perhaps already completed another degree or a 2-year degree. That would come second, most recent to least recent, within the header, within each one of the headers. Style, for sure. Use some bold, use some italics, make it easy to read. Don't overdo it so it gets too busy, but use that to break up the text a little bit. Bullets we talked about. And headers. One of the things I'm going to really encourage you to think about doing at this point in your career path is splitting your experiences between relevant experiences and other experiences, or health information management experiences and other experiences, because I want you to pull all that information closer to the top. They conducted a study, which I thought was fascinating, of the eye movement of hiring managers as they review resumes. They do that with commercials and ads and other things, but they did it with resumes. And they found that first, the recruiters hovered over the person's name. They want to know who you are. Do we have any connections? Have they worked here before? So I would make your name big and bold. 18, 20 font size is not unusual to make it that large. The next thing they did is they hovered over education, especially if education was a requirement of the job. So I would move your education to the top for most of you at this point, because it's probably what will make you qualified for promotions or different positions, and might be a requirement of the jobs you're applying for. Next, they hovered over the first 1 or 2 jobs or 1 or 2 entries after that, and then a scan to rest the document. So if we know that's true, we really want to pull the most relevant information up to the top. Your name, big and bold, your education, your top 2 jobs that are most relevant. And then the other stuff is good, and if they like you, they're going to spend more time on it. But at least the first glance, we want to make sure they're seeing the things that are related to what you're applying for. And again, I can't say it enough, but check again, and check again. Okay, the content itself, so the easiest, we already started to talk about, the name. Once you work on that, you often will use that same, whatever format you use to list your name and contact information, you might use it at the top of your resume, the top of your cover letter, maybe the top of a reference list, maybe the top of a thank you note. So it becomes like your personalized letterhead. So you can dress it up a little bit by putting a line underneath of it, maybe some interesting formatting with your name. Interesting, but still easy to read. So think about how you might set that up. If you're posting your resume on public sites, I usually have you take your mailing address off. Protect your privacy a little bit. I think your phone, your email is fine. If you're mailing it in, you're submitting it to a specific position, then I think it's fine to have your address on there. But if you're going to be in a public posting site, protect your privacy and take your mailing address off. Education, again, your most recent degree at the top. You would be listing, I don't think I included this on this presentation, the college's name includes the word "the" in front of it, so just for consistency, you'd have the College of St. Scholastica, and Saint is usually ST period, that's sort of the standard on all of our materials. If your GPA is above a 3.0, I would include that. If you're receiving a minor, if you got an award or a scholarship specifically to your field, you might include that. Study abroad, other certifications. If you have it, great. If you don't, no worries. A lot of this is just if you have it, here's where you would include that information. Okay, I think I want to pause. See if there are, let's see, I'm trying to see if there's anything else I want to make sure to cover before we go to the next topic. Okay, we'll get to content in a second. I think that's good. I think I've covered everything. I just want to look through my list here. Okay, I'll do a little bit on content and I'll break again. Remember that if you take away the word in a header, instead of saying work experiences, you say relevant experiences or experiences, then it can include both paid and unpaid positions, professional positions and internships, might even be some volunteer work if it's particularly relevant to what you're applying for. Divide those headers. Again, we talked about that a little bit. When you start writing those bulleted description statements, I really want you to think about starting immediately with the action verb. So skipping things like, I was responsible for, or my duties included. You can skip that language altogether and jump right into that action verb. Assist, developed, produced, managed. If it's a job you're currently in, usually you're using present tense of the verb. If it's a job from the past, you would be using past tense of the verb. It is nice for you to try to use different verbs as you go through. Sometimes we get stuck and we say assist, assist, manage, manage, managed, and it doesn't make for very interesting writing if you do it that way. So I would, the best you can, try to have a variety of different verbs. You can repeat a few, but you just won't want to repeat very often. And then again, when you're focusing on those achievements, think about ways you can quantify. Think about what people have told you you're really good at in your reviews. What does your supervisor note about you? What are you proud of? What did you make better, more efficient? Those are the kind of things that are really interesting on your resume. So think about how you could write those out and how would you describe those. Sometimes you need to chat it through with someone where you can say, I'm going to tell you about my job. Ask me questions to help me determine what the most important parts are. Okay. And we talked about splitting in the experience. Definitely you might have a section also about skills, or a section on community involvement, professional involvement. So usually it's going to be your name, and then education, relevant experience or health experience, health information management experience. The next one might be other or supporting experiences. And the last category might be community involvement, leadership, special skills, something like that. For many of you, I would strongly encourage you to have a technology or a skills section. The database systems, the EMRs that you've worked with, any programming languages, any website development, any unique technology, for sure put it on your resume. 2 reasons. One, employers are looking for it. It's a special skill. They know they don't have to train you, or they know that you know how to learn technology, which is great. The second is there are some systems where they are still sending them through an application system and they're scanning for keywords. And one field they do that with is anything that has some technology. So they're scanning to see if you have certain technology systems. That's normally in really large organizations, but it's still worth it for you to be considering. When I review resumes with students, I say there's sort of 3 levels of review. The first is the format working okay? Is it functioning? Can I scan through it? Can I tell what your headers are? Is it have enough white space that's readable, but not so much white space it looks blank? So the first part is format. The second is, are you getting the right kind of content in there so that you're showing those action verbs, you're showing accomplishments, you're showing your skills, demonstrating those abilities. The third and highest level is that it's very focused and specific for your field, so that when a person reads it, they can tell your expertise, or they can tell what you're applying for. You're tailoring it to a specific job. You're making it compelling so someone would clearly be able to see how your experiences relate to whatever you're applying for. And all the way through, you're highlighting the most relevant and recent for the position that you're currently applying for. So again, that might mean cutting some bullets down for a job that wasn't quite as related, or it might be cutting things out that are 20 years ago because you haven't done that in 20 years, so you might cut back or reduce the length. I usually encourage people to have a master copy of their resume that includes everything you've ever done. So you don't lose it, it's there. But then you're going to customize it and make it smaller for this point in your life, or for this particular job, or this particular job search in a general sense. And of course, using language appropriate for the field. So when we talk about having resumes reviewed, we're always willing to look at your resume and give you feedback. I think it's great to have someone in your field. They're going to pick up on things that we don't know, sort of how important some language might be or what language to use. So that could be a faculty member, a classmate, someone that you work with. And then it's great to have those friends that love editing, the writers in your life, have them look through to catch all the other little typos and things that you might be missing. Okay, we talked about this, pulling out those relevant experiences, putting in a new category, having another one that's related experiences. I think I sort of jumped ahead on this. Okay, so I want you to think about, in your field, the types of skills that you think, sort of no matter what the organization was, is or was, and what they would be looking for beyond technology, beyond hard skills. What are the kind of skills that, sort of regardless of industry, people want for successful employees? So if you think about that a little bit, you can have those in your head, you know it because you've hired. So if you think about those, that's what you want to focus on. And here's what we hear from the employers. Communication skills, self-confidence, listening, flexibility, adaptability. These are probably not new to you. You've been in the working world, you get these kind of things. The reason you want to demonstrate it on a resume is employers will say, and you maybe have been in this position, I'm willing to train someone on our process. I'm willing to teach someone our technology. But people don't want to train others if they don't have to on how to play well with others and communicate. So they want to know you're coming in with those skills, that you have the ability to collaborate, to work through problems, to be part of a team, to work independently, to think critically, to connect with other departments. So any ways that you can show that in your past experiences is great. That would be highly desired. On our website, we have our whole job search handbook, which you will have access to, and we have a whole page of action verbs. So if you start finding yourself getting stuck using 1 or 2 or 3 action verbs over and over again, there's a whole list here for you to expand what verbs you're using in the resume. Okay, we talked about that. Here's an example of this idea of trying to move beyond just what you did. So this was someone who was writing about a job they had. So listen to clients' concerns about product line, answer telephone and direct calls to staff members. Sometimes simply by putting numbers in, you get a much better picture of the scope of that particular position. And sometimes if you put adverbs or results of, again, okay, I'm getting a better sense of what that job was. Now, it doesn't mean you need to put numbers in every one. Sometimes it's not impressive or it just doesn't fit. But if you can start to think about what you did was to ensure what, or demonstrated strong interpersonal skills in resolving customer concerns, successfully managed team of 10, including hiring, performance reviews, and weekly meetings, something like that. So you're moving beyond just saying managed a staff to how many and how did you do that well? What skills did you use? Again, this is usually the part that takes people the most time to really be sort of working on the wording to get that depth. Objectives and summaries, I get lots of questions, like at the top of the resume, do you include an objective statement? And it's super interesting when I ask employers this question. Some of them still like it, some of them don't. So it's hard for me to give a definitive answer on this one. Here's what I do hear consistently. If you use an objective, it should be short, to the point, and very focused on the position that you're applying for. So your objective might be, if it were me, I would be putting seeking career services director position, or seeking director position at the College of St. Scholastica. So you'd be very specific about it. The reason so many employers say you don't need it is they've gone to online systems, right? Most of the applications are online. And as part of that online system, you check what you're applying for, what the position is. So why do you need to say it in the objective? I don't think you do. The exception to that is maybe you're going to a networking event, or you're going to a HEMA conference, where you might be bringing and passing out paper copies of your resume. If that's the case, then people might want to know what you're looking for. Then you would include it. Summary statements, people often will make these too vague. If they include them, they'll have things like strong communicator, proven team player. And employers say they just skip it because anybody can say that. So either you want to demonstrate those skills below in your bulleted descriptions, or you need to be more concrete. So you might say something about the number of years management experience you have. So you might say proven management experience through 15 years of supervision in 3 different settings. That summarizes it for me, and it's concrete. I might look below to see the proof, but it's not those vague statements like I'm a great communicator. That they want proven through the bulleted descriptions. Okay, and then some of these, it really depends who you are and what your background is. You might be super involved in professional organizations, you've done community leadership, you have some special traits that you think might be interesting. Again, I think technology for a lot of you would make sense. If you are fluent or conversational in other languages, I would include that. Those are all selling points about you. So those are definitely things that I would have you consider. Some of you have certifications in different areas. I would include that as well. That being said, if you have a certification that has nothing to do with the job you're applying for, you don't have to have it on your resume. Summary of experiences to have the employer considered you for employment. So you get to pick and choose which things you include. References, the old style on the bottom of a resume. We would put references available upon request. Don't need it anymore. They know that if they ask for it, you're going to give it to them. And it should be a separate standalone document. Same name letterhead that you've used on everything else. And then the name of references who you would have asked in advance if they were willing to be a reference. And then how their relationship to you. So, you know, Mary Anderson, Director of Career Services, former supervisor, current supervisor, colleague, coach, advisor, faculty member, whatever it is. And then contact information is usually phone and email. You would check with your reference what contact information they want listed. Key here is to always ask ahead of time. Make sure people are willing to be your reference. In the future, if you apply for graduate programs, then instead of just having a reference list, it's asking for the reference letters. For that, just make sure you give lots of lead time, usually a month in advance, to ask for a reference letter. They take time. People want to do them well. People are busy. And in some cases, people are asked quite a bit. So faculty members, for example, might be asked a fair amount to write letters. So you want to have plenty of time for them to do that. When you ask references, I also encourage you to ask, and then ask how you can make their job easier. So you come to me, Mary, could you be a reference? Sure. How can I make your job easier? I might say to someone asking me for a reference, can you give me a copy of your resume? Could you keep me informed of positions that you're applying for? Find out how you can make their job easier. And then I definitely would send a thank you note afterwards. Thanks for serving as a reference. I want to let you know I received an offer and have accepted a job, blah, 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 something like that. I pulled this one just to give you an example of an HIM. You know, you're probably looking at wanting to highlight management skills, overseeing different processes, updates, technology systems, maybe working with clients, resolving questions and issues, educating other people on systems, teaching other people things. And again, this is just a snapshot, but I wanted you to see something related to your field in terms of what those descriptors might look like. Must be the end of the day, I'm having trouble talking. So what those descriptors look like. Okay, I'm going to do this and then I'm going to pause and we're going to chat about questions. I think most of this we've talked about. 1 to 2 pages. Font size should be at least a 10 font size or larger. Make sure you're distributing the material evenly over the page. If you're printing it out and handing it out, use neutral colored paper. There are some sort of funky resume papers out there, but they end up being a little bit hard to read. So I usually am using white, ivory, buff, off-white kind of colors. Checking again. What not to include, at least in the United States, this is different in different areas. You would not include a picture or any personal information. Generally, we're not putting any hobbies. We're hesitant to put too much political or religious sort of sensitive topics. People can't legally make a decision on you based on what you put there, but could it bias someone? Maybe. Let's play it safe and take it off. Generally not using abbreviations except for a state, or if something just widely known in your field, an abbreviation, then you could use that. Getting rid of the I statements, I was responsible for. Skip it, jump into the action verb. And of course, everything on there needs to be provable so that you're not lying. They can see your transcript, they could call your supervisor, so everything that you have out there they could see. Okay. So let's see if I can get on here. Why don't you, if you wouldn't mind, let me know what kind of questions you might have. Let me get back to the chat function here. And I think I got everyone in. So what kind of questions do you have? One, or based on your own experiences, because you've reviewed a lot of resumes, what are some quick tips? Some of the things that were always red flags to you, or things that definitely help in the readability of our resume? Anything? And you can jump in on if you want to just verbally say it too. Any questions? I'm not seeing any.
I don't have any HIM experience. All of my experience is PCA or like restaurant work.
Yep.
How do I make myself seem compelling to an employer?
Yeah, that's a great question. So a couple different ways I think you could do it. One is under your education, you might put a little bit more than maybe some of your classmates under education. So
Okay.
you might have two additional headers or subheaders under your education. One might be relevant coursework, and you're going to highlight some of your courses so they can see, oh, she hasn't worked in the field, but she's taken database management and health information management courses.
Okay.
The other thing you could consider is having a section called relevant projects.
Okay.
So if you've had some kind of significant projects in some of your classes, highlight those almost as if it was a job so you can really add in some details.
Okay.
So those are both good. The next thing you could do, so your first header might not read health information management experience. You could consider having one that says healthcare experiences, and then your PCA still falls in there.
Right.
And maybe it depends, I might have to see your whole resume, but if a lot of your other experiences are customer service based, you might have one header healthcare experiences and another header customer service experiences.
Okay, I like that.
Yeah, and again, it sort of depends on what else you have with it, but you're starting to chunk it out by broad skill areas that are going to be relevant to the employer.
Okay.
And then the last thing is you might have a technology section.
Okay.
Depends how strong. Some of you are like, technology isn't my greatest strength. I'll put it on there, but I don't want it to be the primary. And others of you, that's sort of the kind of positions you're looking for.
So in the technology section, would I include more about like technology that I've used through my coursework? Because that's where most of that would come from.
Yep, that would just be that. That makes sense. One of the things I tell people to be thoughtful about, and sometimes you actually list it on your resume, is what level experience you actually have.
Okay.
So someone might put technology and have 3 headers underneath there. One might be proficient, and they'll put Epic, publisher, something, working knowledge of, or baseline experience with.
Okay.
You can think what that is, but you want to be honest about how much experience you have. You don't want to say it and then for them to think you're an expert. Yeah. So the resume is all about selling yourself, but honestly, and not overselling too much. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
Okay.
cool. Thank you.
Okay.
So, this is Mirella Malkuch. I'm using my phone.
Yes.
It would be, I used to have, when I got my RHIT, I used to have summary on the top where I would say how many hours of internship I completed and all your how you completed your certification if you receive it by the time you start looking for it. So then list all internships that are in healthcare. That I think that helped when I was because I was switching from different industry.
Yes, for sure. If you have internships, field experiences, anything like that, paid or unpaid, if it were in the field, I agree, list those kind of things out.
Okay.
I don't know if this will fit for any of you. Sometimes people have even done some volunteering or observation or job shadowing in the field. I think it just shows exposure and commitment because you've...
As a PCA, I was a volunteer at a nursing home.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So how would I write that? Because I feel weird when I say I was a volunteer because I was getting paid for it. But I was volunteering with my client so I could supervise her while she volunteered.
Oh, interesting. So you were being paid though?
I was being paid by a company to go. I was being paid. But I was considered a volunteer when I was at the nursing home because I was being paid by a different company.
I think it almost, because you're being paid, I don't think you need to list that you're a volunteer, and it gets too complicated to try to explain that on a resume.
Okay.
So I think as long as you're paid, you're an employee, but then you're trying to figure out what your title was, right?
Yeah, so I just helped old people get to and from like church services. Like I would go with my client to their room and wheel them to the community service thing where they would have their church service, and then we'd take them to coffee time and then take them back.
Were you called a personal care attendant? Did they use that term?
Direct support professional. I was called that while I was working with my client, but they just called me a volunteer at the nursing home.
I think rec support. What did you say? Rec support?
Direct support professional.
Direct supports. I probably use that title.
Okay.
Yeah. It is true. If you truly were volunteering where, I know that was sort of your title, but if you're truly volunteering where there's no pay exchanged, it is wise to be honest about that on a resume, to say volunteer. But I think volunteer assumes you were not given any compensation for that.
Yeah, that's the thing, is I want to be honest. I don't want to sound like but that's what they called me when I was there. So
yeah. No, I think that's fine. I think if you
include that under, because I already have the direct support professional in my resume, so would I just include maybe the nursing home experience under that heading?
Yeah, I think that probably makes sense.
Okay.
Try it that way. Sometimes I'll give advice and then we'll put it on paper. It's like, oh, it looks goofy there, and we'll have to change it. So sometimes we need the visual. So let's try it that way. See what you think if it looks okay that way.
Okay.
Here's one other thing that might be a little bit for you, but it might be the other flip side. When someone's been in a position for a long time, sometimes you'll have one organization but have subheaders underneath of it.
Okay.
So you might have the name of the organization and then your direct supports professional, couple bullets, and then additional volunteer duties, and a couple more bullets.
Okay.
If any of you've been in a job and you've been there 10 years, the reality is most employers say they won't look at more than about 5, 6, or 7 bullets. But if you chunk it out, they'll actually read more than that. So you might have, if I did it, I would have my job. I've been here 16 years now, and I might have management, and I'd have all the things I do in a management role. And then I might have another one that's direct service to students, and I'd have bullets there. So keep that in mind as one route that you might go. Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Let's see.
I got a question.
Yes.
So if for my work history, if I was hired by a temp agency,
Yes.
and after working for a while at an on-site place, I got hired, how will I report that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would put the first line would be the full-time position at the organization and the date that you started in terms of when you were hired by the company. Underneath of it, you would use the temp agency and the dates that you were there, but the bullets underneath will be shared because what you were doing was probably the same thing. You just have 2 entries before you start your bullets. So if I'm going to use me, and then you can see if this translates. If it were me, I'd put Director of Career Services, 2015 to present. Underneath that, I might put temp employee serving as, and your title, through Adecco Services. So, and put the date of that, 2012 to 2016 or 2012 to 2013. So you're actually listing your permanent title on top and then you're acknowledging you started through an employment agency. If that's the case, one of your bullets, and it could be one of your first bullets, you might have hired in permanent position. How long were you in the temp position?
It was just a second.
Okay.
It was just about a couple months.
Okay.
So like 5 months. That's
5 months.
Uh-huh.
So you could make that a selling point and say hired into a permanent position after 5 months of successful work through temp agency. Because it says something about you that they chose to hire you after just 5 months, that you proved yourself sort of through that. So you could actually make that one of your bullets.
Okay, and then the employer name will go under the temp agency? Or?
Yes, so I think you could say, keep it consistent all the way through. So it might be your job title and the employer. So whatever your current job title is in your employer and the date that you're hired in that permanent role. Underneath of that, you would have the job title and then through Adecco Services, through Manpower, and the dates for that. And then the bullets would be underneath that. Does that make sense?
Okay, it makes sense.
Okay. And again, if you want to give it a try and then send it to me, we can take a look and make sure it still looks okay once you do it that way.
Okay, that's good.
It reminds me, though, some others of you may have had a promotion within an organization. And so you can just list the organization once, and I might put like Director of Career Services in bullets, and then down lower I would have Career Counselor. I don't need to list the name of the employer again because it's just a different job title, and then I'd have the bullets for that position. It is very helpful to say that you were promoted to position of blah, 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 based on what? Promoted to supervisor position based on exceptional communication skills and proven work experience, something like that. So if any of you have had those promotions or multiple positions within one organization, it's great to list it that way. Okay.
So you would not list those promotions, you would not list those as a separate job, like from that to that day you work on one position, then again listing different positions?
No, I think you could. I think you could have like department manager, United Health Group, and that date, and you have bullets. Then below it you have the previous job title and the date and bullets there. It's just that one of your descriptions under the highest level position might acknowledge that you were promoted and based on what reasons that you were promoted.
Okay.
But I would list both of the job titles as long as they're relevant, but for most of the time those would be relevant.
Okay. Okay.
Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. Let's see. A couple other things I saw pop up here. Ooh, sorry. I'm going to get... I went all the way to the top. Okay, let's see what else. Yeah, definitely any of your technology, focus on your strengths. Your EHR is definitely, and again, sometimes it's not that the system they use is the system that you're currently using, but the thought is if you can learn one, you can learn others. In fact, the more you do, the easier new systems come to you. So it's good to have that in there. Okay, recover letters, they tell about individual. Let's talk about this. This is great. The gaps in work history. This is challenging because many people have gaps in work history for lots of reasons. So if there's a gap, I would rather have you tell me about that in the cover letter than not, and leave it to my imagination to figure out what was happening during that gap. I would not dwell on it necessarily, but at least to acknowledge. So you could say, you know, what's a good example? I just read some cover letters, and one of the applicants put, after having the privilege of taking 5 years to raise my family, I am returning to the workforce. During this time, however, I served in a variety of community leadership roles and volunteered regularly, blah, blah, blah. So you tell me, and then I'm like, okay, they were at home with some kids during that time, and I'm not questioning it. If another person I just saw had moved, they had, I can't remember, I think it was either 4 or 5 jobs, one every year. That can be, so that's not so much a gap, it just looks like someone who's job hopping, which could also be concerning. And if I remember right, this person's husband was a military person, so they got moved a whole bunch. I think that was it. So anyways, we put it in the cover letter because, again, it's not in my imagination. And you put a positive twist on it. So you could have something like, I was fortunate to have the opportunity to live and work in 5 different settings over the past 5 years as I moved with my husband during military promotions. We have now settled in Duluth, Minnesota, and I'm excited to be applying for this position. Great. You cover it, you made it positive, you're not dwelling on it. So that's also good. Okay. I've seen newer resume styles using the title first in bold, company in italics. Yeah, I think that looks nice. I agree with you. And sometimes here's the thing, you will decide, is the company more impressive or your job title more impressive? Bold the one that's more impressive. So sometimes it's like, for me, St. Scholastica is great, but maybe right now my career path, my job title I feel is more impressive, I would bold it. Versus someone else might say, I've been working at United Healthcare, and that's more important than what my exact job title was because I was doing entry-level customer service. So they would italicize the job title and bold the company. So depending what you're applying for, you could decide which is bold and which is italics. Would you put that's interesting. Yeah, so I think the decision on what else you list in terms of volunteer is how relevant it is to the positions that you're applying for. Try to put on the lens of the employer. Does it add something new about you? Does it add a different skill set? Does it show a commitment to something that they wouldn't be able to see anyplace else on your resume? And then if it has value added, if you think of it in that language, then I would include it. If it's something like, I felt deeply about this cause and participated, but I've covered those skills somewhere else or it's not really relevant at all, then you wouldn't include it on the resume. Does that make sense? Yeah. And occasionally it depends. If you have plenty of other stuff, then you start dropping off some of these smaller things. So some of it depends how big the scope is of your full work experience and educational history. So unfortunately, sometimes it depends based on everything else.
I have a question. How would you kind of, I supervise 2 different hospitals.
Okay.
All for one organization. It's St. Peter's Health Partners. We have 5 hospitals, but I supervise 2 of those. How would I kind of like list that as a job title or just whatever? I'm not too sure.
What is your formal job title?
I am the supervisor for HIM operations for Samaritan and St. Mary's Hospital. And they're both in Troy, New York. And we're part of St. Peter's Health Partners.
That makes it super complicated, doesn't it? There's a whole mouthful.
My coworker, my equivalent, is the supervisor for St. Peter's Hospital for St. Peter's Health Partners.
I know, and you're like, this is a lot to say. So I think the key thing would be the supervisor. Supervisor, did you say, of Health Information Department? Yeah. So that would be the title. The play underneath of it, I think you could put Well, there's two ways you could do it. You could list the two hospitals, and then like comma, and then the name of the parent organization. Or you could just put the parent organization underneath, but then your first bullet should be
Supervise 2 sites.
Yep.
Okay.
Oversee and supervise health information management department at 2 hospitals, or you name those. So I think either of those are fine. They're both honest. It's maybe which one flows better for the reader. It also kind of depends if you're applying to that organization. You have to worry about it less because they understand the system. It's when you apply somewhere else that they might not know the relationships between all of those. Yeah, I think it's a great question that relates to so many other things on resumes. You're trying to be honest and descriptive without getting so bogged down in some of our job description titles, right? Sometimes our titles are huge and it just takes up too much room on the page, but you want to be honest. Yeah. Does that help?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then also, I haven't included it on recent ones, but I'm going to make a general blank one, extended one with everything that I have done, but I still work part-time at my local Y. It's more for giggles and fun and just it relaxes me. But I am proud to say I've been there for 11 years, and it kind of does show a different side of me that I'm not just all work. I do have fun and, teach at other facilities. I teach at the Y, so.
Yeah, I would include that personally. So your job right now, you're going to have your job with lots of bullets and descriptions. Then you might have another category called other experience or supporting experience. You might not put any bullets for the Y position, but even if you listed, fitness instructor, YMCA, 2000, whatever that was, 10 to 18 or 9 to 18, it's just enough that I can see that longevity of the job. And it'll be an interesting conversation starter. If you come in, it's like, oh, this is interesting. What have you been doing at the Y? Why do you do that? And then you can use that for conversation. So for some of those, I for sure would list. You just might not put bullets. Even sometimes, I forgot the name of the student who said, sorry, I don't see it right up here now, but if you didn't have as much experience and you said you had worked at I can't remember if you said a restaurant business. Sometimes if you have enough relevant experience, again, you list those jobs, maybe wait staff, wherever it is in the date, landscaping crew, whatever in the date. I don't need your job description bullets probably for that. But if I see someone who's worked as a waiter or waitress or landscaping, you know how to work hard and you know how to deal with crabby people and you know how to be persistent. So it rounds it out and tells something about the person. Yeah. Any other questions? You're good? Trying to see if any others came in. So let's do, I want to talk, what time is it? 5:05. Okay. I want to briefly talk about cover letters. I'm not going to go back to my presentation. I think we can have more of a conversation. Cover letters, again, is the narration that goes along with your resume. Only 1 page. Don't make it longer than 1 page. You can use the same name letterhead at the top of your resume that you use at the top of your cover letter, etc. But a cover letter can also be a business formal style, which would be single space, double space between headers, all flush left. It's usually 3 to 4 paragraphs, 10 to 12 sentences. The key thing you want to do in a cover letter is to make sure you show passion for place and position and tie your experiences to whatever you're applying for. And maybe explain gaps or something that's not clear on your resume. In this past job application process I was part of when I was reviewing applications, I would say 75% of the people use generic cover letters. I could tell they use the exact same cover letter for every single position they applied for. I know it's a pain to change it, but it stands out. When you put a line in there that says, I'm particularly interested in employment at the College of St. Scholastica because of your Benedictine values and your strong history of excellent education, blah, whatever it is. I know you've done research. I know you want to work at my organization. So look up mission, reputation. Why is it that you are picking them? So one paragraph is sort of your introduction to who you are. One paragraph would be why them. One paragraph would be why you. What do you have to bring in? Don't just repeat everything they can read in the resume, but summarize that in a little different format that connects it directly to the position. I think those are probably the main things. Yeah, usually it's a formal salutation, so it can be Dear Hiring Manager, but if you know the person, it's even better to use someone's name. Sometimes, especially in medical systems, it's nearly impossible to track down in a big system, but if you can, include that. So it might be Dear Mary Anderson. If you know gender, you could put Dear Miss Anderson or Dear Mr. Smith, colon, space, and then your 3 to 4 paragraphs. Last paragraph generally is thank you for your time and consideration. I look forward to connecting with you to further discuss my qualifications. So you're thanking them and inviting the next step in the process.
Where do you put your explanation of employment gap in those 4 paragraphs? Which one does it go in?
Yeah, I wouldn't lead in with it. I'd probably have it as about paragraph number 3, roughly. And so if you start with who you are, a little bit about your skills, a little bit about why them, I think I'd make it the next paragraph and say, as you review my application, you may note that 2012 to 14, I was at home raising a family. I was involved in whatever it is. That's probably where I put it.
All right, perfect.
So
Thank
it's
you.
acknowledged, but it's not your lead-in.
All right, so perfect. Thank you.
Yep. Other questions? Okay, I'm going to do one last thing, and then I will let you all move on to dinner or family or studying or whatever the next thing is. So I'm going to share my screen one more time, if I can. Okay, I'm not going to dwell on this one. There's always funny things that people put because they forgot to spell check. So, dispense medication and passed out, or enjoy cooking Chinese and Italians probably is not what the person meant to put. So why it's important to have lots of checking, right? Okay. We already talked about this. I just want to show you. Oh yeah, here's what you all really want to do in a cover letter, because it's like, really, I just want the job. But yes, there is an expectation to be more than that. I want to show you, oh yeah, this was also funny. Someone on a resume had, it was sort of, I think, in jest, but marijuana dealer, because they felt like there was lots of transferable skills in there. Building client relationships, managing customers. Yeah, we don't want to do that. Okay. One thing on here, resumes at css.edu. And Katie, I don't know if you're still on, but just FYI, we just got this today, actually, so that all resumes can be put into one place. So that's the email. If it comes to me by mistake, it's fine. This allows us to keep track of the resumes that come in. So you could email resumes at css.edu, attach your resumes, and then we'll look and give you feedback on it. Okay, this is small. You don't have to be able to read it all. I just want to show you a couple formatting things. So you can see this person has education, nursing experience, other experience, volunteer activities. I just want you to see it in terms of how those headers can be broken down. And clearly a nursing, you can tell it's nursing focused. The other experience in this case was a coffee shop. They chose to put bullets because they had been a manager there. I think they did it for 3 or 4 summers. So they included both, but put that under other. This one I wanted to show you, this is a good example. On the very bottom, it says other experience, waiter, cashier, whatever. Here's an example of someone who's showing they've worked a few other positions, but for those positions, they didn't put the bulleted descriptions. This is also another good example up at the top under education, relevant courses, technical experiences. Relevant courses often works well in 3 columns or 2 columns. It just saves space. If not, it's a lot of weird white space if you just do it in 1 column. So I just wanted to show you a couple different formats there. And this I simply put up so you can see the format. This is called business professional format for cover letters, flush left, single space between major entries. No, double space between major entries and everything else is single space. If you want, instead of putting those top 2 lines, which would be your address, most students I work with end up just using the same letterhead that they use on the top of their resume. So either way is acceptable though. 1, 2, 3. This person has 4 paragraphs and a thank you for the time at the end. Okay. So I just wanted to show those to you. I will make sure you'll have this recording, but I'll make sure that Katie has the presentation too. So if you want to go back and reference anything, you can.
So we're gonna get PowerPoint.
Yes, I will send that probably tonight or tomorrow to Katie so she has it. Katie, your instructor, and get it out to you.
Yep, and I was just going to mention I do have the job search handbook linked in Blackboard too for them.
Okay.
So.
That's outstanding. That's great. You know, the other thing that I'm going to send when I send a PowerPoint is we have a resume and cover letter checklist, which is really helpful. So you've made the updates, you've heard all this feedback. It just walks you through step by step, and you can go, font size big enough, good, check. Enough margins, good, check. So everything you can go through. So I'll send that because it's just a really nice working document for you to critique yourself.
I have a question.
Yeah.
I noticed on my resume, because my resume is gone into 2 pages.
Yes.
I have my association and my committees and my certifications on there because I'm on the AHIMA Privacy and Security Council.
Yep.
So should I include that?
I would, definitely.
Okay.
I think it shows leadership, it shows commitment and connection to your profession as a whole. So I would, and depending on the person, your header might be professional involvement, committee leadership, community involvement. So it can vary a little bit, but I think that's great. Yeah, I would include that. The only time I'd say take it off is, let's say you did that and it was 17 years ago that you did it, then I start to drop those things off. But if it's in the last 10 years, I would probably leave it on there. I think that's great. You guys had great questions. It makes it more interesting when we start to get, you do the general comments, but when you get real, like, what about this and what would this look like? So I appreciate you all jumping in.
So those examples that you just showed, they have education listed first, but
Yeah.
if you already have experience, for example, in HIM, would it make sense to put education down and experience first, or how you want?
Yeah, when someone's been working a number of years, sometimes you're right, we flip it and we would put experience first and education second. I think the reason for some of you, even if you have experience, that you might put education first is either it is required for the position you're applying for, so you don't want them to have to search to make sure you meet the minimum qualifications, or your current education is what is making you newly or qualified in a different way for a position or a promotion. So in those cases, there might be logic to still put it up at the top. So a little bit, it depends on your situation. I'm guessing for some of you, you'll still want education up at the top so they don't have to verify you have the minimum requirements, and or they can see you've been working on this really cool initiative along with everything else in your life. I think that also says something about your ability to be an active learner. So I'm inclined to put it at the top, but there are times where you have enough experience, you might put it down on the bottom. Not at the bottom, but after your experience.
Yeah, thank you.
Yep.
Makes sense.
Anything else?
What do we do for our education? Because obviously, like when we start our PPE, I won't have my bachelor's yet. What do we do to like note that?
Yeah, so if you had Bachelor of Science, Health Information Management for the date, you can just put like May 2019 and they'll understand it's in progress, or you could put anticipated or expected May 2019. So list the best guess you have of when you're going to graduate. So anticipated or
Oh, I'm sorry. Where does that May 2019 go? So I have Bachelor of Science, then the college, then the minor, then the GPA.
For your work experiences, where do you have your date?
My work experiences, my date's over flush on the right-hand side.
Then I would do the same thing for the education. So make it match. So Bachelor of Science and then flush on the right. Expected May 2019 or just May 2019.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Yep. Yeah, and someone else put I have anticipated graduation date 5/12/19. That's just fine too.
Right.
Yeah, so let's see. I have 3 pages, but the last is my former career. While I dealt with privacy, it was not healthcare related. So it depends on 2 things. One is how long ago was that job? If it was more than 10 years ago, you probably could drop it all together. But if it's more recent than that, I might include it on your resume, but take out all the bullets. So put it under a section called like relevant experience or other experience. Okay. Oh, what does employer consider expert Excel? Oh. So I think your question is what is considered expert Excel word skills?
So I regularly get, this is Lisa, I asked that question. So I regularly get resumes that say expert Excel skills. And then when I start asking like, what kind of formula building are you doing? What kind of pivot tables are you doing? They're like, oh, well, that's not what I consider expert.
Right.
And I'm like, that's what I consider expert. So just for, how do you level set on a resume some of those things that you may feel is expert, but
it's
not.
It's a great question, and I think people sometimes oversell, and it's a problem because then you feel like they weren't telling the truth. In my opinion, expert would be almost everything about Excel. So almost any question someone could ask you, you'd be able to answer. Versus proficient might be, I use lots of things and I know how to learn it, but I don't know everything. Okay. So, I mean, I know sometimes it's just one person's choice of word over the other. I would just be hesitant to say expert unless you truly know like everything there is about that particular system. Here's a flip side of that. I was at a professional meeting and someone else was sharing that they had a student that put like fluent in Spanish, and the person came in and started speaking Spanish and was going to conduct the interview in Spanish, and they're like, yeah, I'm not really I'm not that fluent. So, this is a bad thing. Same with when you ask the question, and if they didn't know how to answer that, they might be proficient, they might have experience in, but probably expert was reaching too far. Is that sort of your experience based on the interviews you've done, or do you have a different opinion how you'd share that?
No, that is, but now just talking out loud, right? Because I usually don't think about that until I'm in an interview, and then I'm like, why would you, like I'm looking at them probably thinking, why would you put that if you don't even know what a pivot table is? Because that's usually what their face glazes over. Right. But it might be a good opportunity for us on our job, like on our, I don't know, whatever, your job description. Oh my gosh, I'm on the struggle bus today. On your job description to say, this is what we consider experts in those levels. So that's probably how we could help other people level set
Yeah.
their skill levels.
That's right. So if you're on the other side of the table and you get to help craft job descriptions, it is helpful. I mean, for the job seeker to name that if you can, if you have that control in your organization. The other way, I mean, if you wanted to sort of give benefit of doubt to the applicant when they came in, you could frame a question like, at our organization, I see you listed expert in Excel. At our organization, we would define that as this. Do you still think you're expert, or would you define yourself, and maybe whatever the other term is you might use at your organization? So you give them a little benefit of the doubt through either way, or you write the job description or in the interview. Does that make sense?
That's a great growth mindset question.
Yes.
That's awesome. I love it.
Yeah. I mean, because people generally are trying to be truthful, but they're trying to get jobs. So instead, and say, here's how we define it. Is that still the best description? Here's another way. I just want to get an accurate sense of your skill level. Yeah.
Okay. Those are good. That's very helpful.
Good. Okay. Any last questions? This is awesome. If you do have questions, you think of them later, or it's more of a private question you don't want to use with the whole group again, just email me directly. My email is manders1. Sometimes that's confusing. So manders1@css.edu. Yes, it came through there. So you can email me those directly. You can email your resumes to me directly too, or careers@css.edu. And I know for some of you, it's like, this is great. Mary, I won't work on this for 2 months. I got too much going on. Or I'm going to do a draft now because I have to for class. And then I'm going to work on it again over the holiday break because I have more time then. We're here. We're here all the time, except over some vacations. So when it's convenient, when you're ready, connect with us and we'll go from there. Thanks for your time and your questions. Enjoy your evening. Stay safe.
Thanks for all your help.
All right. You're welcome. Thanks, Katie.
Yes, thank you. Have a good evening.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Thank you.
Good evening.